What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children. What's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello everyone, this is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to today's special edition of the Robust Opposition. Today the topic is going to be rent strikes and general strikes. And I'm pleased to have a fantastic panel with me today. Below me is Kshama Sawant, who is a Seattle City Council member. And many people remember her from being the one to get that city to be the first one to implement a $15 minimum wage. How are you today, Kshama?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
And next to her is Kali Akuno, who is with Cooperation Jackson, an organization I learned about last year in Jackson, Mississippi, who's doing all sorts of great things in his community. He will talk about them later. How are you, Kali?
Doing good. Thank you for having me.
Next to me is Peggy Perkins, who is with New York Communities for Change and also the Working Families Party in Hempstead, Long Island. How are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
5 million people filed unemployment claims last week, bringing the total to 22 million unemployment claims in the past month. 31% of Americans did not pay their rent between April 1st and 5th, which is a 12% decline from that period 1 month prior. So obviously this coronavirus is impacting this country in a way not seen in 100 years, with the pandemic, the Spanish flu of 1918 and the Great Depression of 1929. Before we get into the topic of the show, which is rent strikes and general strikes, can each of you talk about briefly how the virus has impacted your community, specifically with regards to the work that you're doing? And we can start with you, Peggy.
Good afternoon. Well, for my community, since I reside in Hempstead, Long Island, it has been a huge impact because many that are on government assistance, disability, and also due to the fact that, for example, testing has not been provided out here. So no one has been able to receive the necessary medical treatments that they need because they have caught the coronavirus crisis. So it's a very difficult issue because we have been left behind, if not thought about. And there are many that are illegal immigrants that are suffering as well.
Okay, and how about you, Kshama?
As you all know, the Seattle region was the first epicenter of the coronavirus crisis, where the first people who were infected were identified. And just to make a connection between the twin crises that people are facing, not just in the Seattle area, but globally, the coronavirus and capitalism. The concrete example, Life Care Center, where which is the senior nursing home where the first infected were found. It's a big conglomerate of nursing homes throughout the western part of the United States, and it's a massive for-profit entity. And so the health of the workers and the residents was not a high priority, and we're seeing why that is playing out. But in addition to that, as your other speaker mentioned, we are facing a massive unemployment crisis. Tens of thousands of Seattleites are unemployed right now, laid off or at home without paid leave. And so that's why we are, as you know, also fight, in addition to the rent strike that we are organizing, we're also fighting for the Amazon tax, which if passed would raise money to provide cash assistance to up to 100,000 households in Seattle over the next 4 months.
Well, good afternoon to everybody who's watching. I'll start with just saying briefly how it's impacted Cooperation Jackson. So within our work, all of our co-ops, with the exception of our farming co-op, basically shut down immediately. And we tried to get ahead of this crisis in the very beginning of March from our own study of how it was progressing. And so folks know why a few of us have taken so much heed to it. We lost a dear comrade a decade ago to SARS. So we had some prior experience as to how serious these things could be, how these coronaviruses could be, and why we were taking it so serious on the front end. So, basically almost all of our folks were out of work pretty quickly. We then shifted to try to do some mutual aid stuff. Within a week, we shut that down because we didn't have the personal protective gear to really make sure that our folks didn't get sick. And that was on the advice of some Italian comrades who had gotten motion in Naples and Milan, and they all got sick, and this gave us warning not to do that. And so we shut that down. Then we kind of have repivoted towards making masks, and we're doing 2 different types of mask production now. And so we have a small team that's back at work, which is a total of 10 people. But that's basically it. So, we've been scrambling to try to reorganize ourselves in our community to address the need here on a citywide level. On the level of unemployment, you really won't notice much of a difference, at least in my neighborhood, because of how serious unemployment was prior. But throughout the city in general, there's been massive layoffs, and we've already seen that many shops, small shops, the mom and pop shops, they're already putting out of business signs up in a lot of different places when you're driving around, looking for supplies or looking for food. So the second wave of this, which is the economic dimension of it, is going to be here and have some major impact for quite some time.
Peggy, can you talk about how your community was dealing with mutual aid? Because that seemed to be the first response. Before we started talking about rent strikes, we immediately jumped into providing mutual aid. So what has been your organization's approach to that?
New York Communities for Change has created a relief fund, and that collects, the funds and the money to actually help out others that actually are in need. I know right now, as far as we have not been able, as far as to help anyone pay their rent, but as far as actually within making sure that people have food on their tables, have their basic needs, to make sure that they are actually taken care of. So, and then we also connect with DSA, with them as well. So we also network with other organizations to make the process a little bit easier.
Okay, and Kshama, what are you doing as far as mutual aid, either in your capacity on this Seattle City Council or with any of your other organizations like Socialist Alternative?
Well, as some of your viewers might know, I was first elected to the City Council over 6 years ago, and I've won 2 re-elections since then. And from the beginning, I have only taken home the average worker's wage, and the rest of my lavish 6-figure salary is donated to social justice movements. And on that basis, we have, that solidarity fund that is from a big portion of my salary has gone into building successful struggles like the $15 struggle. Also has been used to donate to union strike funds, and now is being used to fund the Tax Amazon movement as well. I'll just say, it's really important to recognize mutual aid shows the incredible compassion and caring that working class people are capable of, despite the adversities we face. And, because we are the ones who live paycheck to paycheck, and the bosses take the lion's share of the prosperity that we are generating. So just the contrast to me is so stunning between the compassion and sacrifice of working class people who have very little to give to that compared with the mean-spiritedness and selfishness of corporate landlords, of big banks, of the political establishment that is bailing out these billionaires to the tune of trillions of dollars, whereas we are getting a pittance. But I would also say, though, in addition to mutual aid, we do need to get politically organized for collective action on political demands, because the mathematics of a system where those of us who are doing mutual aid have so little, and most of the wealth lies in the hands of the a small minority at the top, that implies that mutual aid, while it is fueled with great feeling and genuine compassion, it can only go so far. Just to give you a concrete example, GoFundMe campaigns for healthcare, statistics show that 90% of GoFundMe campaigns fail for the simple reason that most of us who care about our fellow people in our society and our community members have very little to give. So healthcare does require us to, the healthcare crisis does require us to wage a political battle to win Medicare for all. And I would go even further, to win socialized medicine, socialized healthcare. That's the same reason why we're also, on the renters issue, we are primarily focusing on a political struggle waged by renters to win rent, mortgage, and utility suspension, period, without consequences, and not primarily focusing on rental assistance and rent relief, because there simply isn't enough money to make sure that everybody's rent is paid. And also in closing, that if we just focus on rent relief and mutual aid, it's really like a bailout for the people at the top who are responsible for the way this crisis is unfolding, in which we are not all in this together. The brunt of the crisis is falling on the working class, on the marginalized. The way the virus has affected poor and immigrant communities in Queens, in New York, there's massive injustice in the way this pandemic is unfolding. And so we need to fight against that injustice.
Well, I was going to bring this up, this kind of political change at the end of the show, but since you brought it up now, before we talk about the rent strikes and how you've been organizing for them, I want to just go to your point, because, Naomi Klein wrote a book on disaster capitalism, and she has that great term, shock doctrine, which describes when something like this happens, how the corporate class, the plutocracy, takes advantage of it to get something for their own benefit, such as in New Orleans, when Hurricane Katrina hit, they used it as a way to privatize all the public schools. They don't have any public schools now, they're charter schools. So the question is, can we make a shock doctrine for the left, for the people, and get certain things into phase 4 bailout that benefit the people, that are structural? For instance, I was very upset with Bernie Sanders, not only for suspending his campaign before half the primaries were over, but for also voting for this bailout, which is way, way worse than the one, after the financial collapse. And he had a live stream before he dropped out, in which he said, in phase 4 of the bailout, because they've already run out of the money for the small businesses, by the way, the $350 billion for the small businesses, they ran out. They were only supposed to give it to businesses that had under 500 employees. Yesterday, I read that Ruth Chris's Steakhouse, that has 5,000 employees, managed to get money, and it's just a travesty that, all the progressives, supposedly who are representing our interests in Congress and the Senate, voted for this. And when Bernie was having that town hall, he said, phase 4 bailout, now is not the time to get Medicare for all. We can get Medicare to cover COVID treatment. And I was looking at the screen and saying, no, Bernie, this is exactly the time that we should be getting Medicare for all. We should be getting Medicare for all. We should be getting a UBI. He's wanting $2,000 a month for the time that people, that we're going through the pandemic. We should get the paid sick leave he's been asking for, the only country of the industrialized countries that don't have it. What is your thinking about this and how we can use this moment? Let's start with you, Kali.
Well, I'll be frank. If we don't use this moment to press forward the structural demands that we need, we're just going to give the right all the power to reorganize society, to make it even more brutal and repressive than it already is. And if we just start with some of the things that they've passed, even beyond, how pitiful that little bailout thing was, and I say little for us in comparison to what the Fed is doing for Wall Street, pumping out trillions of dollars, on a weekly basis, and just they've stated, just up front in everybody's face, we're going to print as much as we need to save the system. which meant that they could have done that at any time to just meet one of their other objectives, which is supposed to be full unemployment. So people always forget that dimension of what supposedly their mandate is. But it just demonstrates that if there was political will, universal healthcare, socialized healthcare could have been something already every person in the United States could have had. You could have done free education. You could have done universal basic income. We could have, college education paid for from birth till postgraduate degrees with the resources that are at the disposal of the United States. So it's really just a question of political will. But like I was saying, if we look at what the Trump administration and his allies have been able to push, we really need to be concerned about it, because it means in the face of the recovery, the situation could be dramatically worse for our environment and seriously worse for all workers. Some of the things that they've passed have just basically eliminated all of the EPA, environmental protection rules and regulations. They've basically just been jettisoned away. They've allowed for new mining operations, right, on lands everywhere in the midst of this pandemic, and using it as an excuse to open things up in a number of different ways. They've suspended a lot of the rules and regulations protecting workers on work sites. So these are things that they have already done. Just a few, and I can go through more. These are things that they've already done, which they are not going to let go without a fight. We need to get that very clear in our heads. It's not like they've unleashed these things, there's going to be some kind of recovery, and then they'll say, we'll go back to the status quo. There is no status quo returning back to, folks. That is over. So it's up for us as working people to determine what the future would be based upon the maximization of our strength, which is our labor power, and us acting in unison to change the world as we see fit and not as they see fit, which will just maximize their profits. We have to make sure that the new order puts people over profits. That's our first and primary thing. Right now, we're in a situation wherein who really is essential and who keeps things functioning, I think, has been more revealed. And there's tremendous amount of power that janitors, nurses, doctors, store clerks, truck drivers have at their disposal that we need to encourage everybody to use, and send a clear message to the forces of capital, send a clear message to the state that we're not going back. We're demanding broad democratization of the economy. We're demanding, self-governance at the level of the plant, at the level of our communities, and we won't go back. And this is easier said than done, but best believe it needs to be done. At least we just enable a much more vicious, fascistic social order in this way.
Tell us how it's looking for in New York, and specifically talk about the bill, because Kshama talked about political action. Let's talk about the bill that you guys are working on in New York State that already has 20 co-sponsors.
Okay, so the bill that we have is it's to say that although rent is due, that's been due, actually, that's be coming up on the 1st. Now, we have to reclaim our homes, and we want to cancel the rent, the mortgage, and the utility payments. Because what happened is that many people have lost their jobs. They have not been able to get back on their feet. So they're going to be unable to pay the rent. Even if they have the money right now to pay next month's rent, they have to put food on the table. There are families that have children with special needs. So it's very difficult to, let's say they have $1,200 and they have to take out of that $1,200 to meet their needs. The purpose of the bill is to help people, put people at ease as far as paying the rent is concerned. And we understand, we're not saying that the rent is basically, we're saying, oh, forget about the homeowners, because we have like the mom and pops that are really trying to struggle. So we are including it in our strike, because although Cuomo has did the 90, which is really upsets me that he did the 90 forbearance about the mortgages, but he's forgetting about the tenants. What about the tenants? The tenants are paying rent as well.
Okay, now Kshama, I know you did a town hall for the Seattle rent strike, and you addressed this question about mom and pop landlords and how they should get a mortgage forbearance. So I was, and I'm just asking them, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, just because these are the questions that come up. There are people that have owned a building. It's an income producing building for them. Maybe they've already paid off their mortgage and they live off of, the income from their tenants. Should people be not paying their rent to them also?
Well, there's the overall, I think, understanding of what we feel is just in society. And I would say, as a socialist, nobody has the right to exploit any other person. I think that if that's not your bottom line, then I don't know what kind of society we are talking about. Because if we don't agree on the fundamental basis of a society, building a society where nobody is being exploited, then I don't think it's a good enough start. It's a good starting point, because then we're accepting something like capitalism where a few are exploiting the many. So I think that has to be the bottom line. And so, I would say in any specific instance, if the tenants themselves have been laid off and, who were already working from paycheck to paycheck and they're unable to pay their rent, then and if it is indeed true that the landlord is also not able to survive without those rent payments, then it is incumbent on that landlord to join the struggle with the tenants and engage in a collective action. And that is why I really agree with Peggy. And, in our petition, which over 9,000 Washingtonians have signed, our statewide petition, we're calling for the exact thing that she mentioned, which is suspending or canceling rent, mortgage, and utility payments. So in the sense that we want to unite working class renters, and that's the majority of working class right now. And I wanted to, add one point around that with some important points that were made from my fellow speakers. We want to unite renters. We want to unite middle class and working class homeowners. A small section of us still, own homes, but we are still living paycheck to paycheck. So if we don't have a paycheck, we're not going to be able to pay the mortgage to the people who actually own the homes, which is the mortgage holders and the big banks. And so we have to unite and understand that our common enemy is the corporate landlords, the rapacious property management corporations who are sucking the blood out of the renters throughout the nation, and the big banks. Ultimately, those are the real culprits, the billionaire class. And so we have to unite renters, homeowners, and small landlords. But I don't think that you can have an ideology where the interests of renters who are struggling to get by being sacrificed because a small landlord is not going to be able to pay. If you're not going to be able to pay, then let's join together in a unified struggle. And that is why we are calling for canceling or suspending rent, mortgage, and utility payments, all of them. That's the same bill that Congressmember Ilhan Omar has also put forward, and that's why I agree with that on that basis. But I would say, just in terms of what Brother Kali was saying, I think the very important point that was made is that we are not going to win this demand, much less socialized medicine or anything bigger than that, unless we actually politically fight. And, I think it was an important point that was made, that there isn't the political will, because regardless of the differences, the actual differences between the Democratic establishment and the Republicans, what they do agree on is prioritizing the interests of Wall Street. So it's absolutely correct what you also said, Lauren, which is that, they will use this crisis as an excuse to take back what we have won. And, just another example I will mention in addition to the Louisiana example from Hurricane Katrina is, look at what happened in the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. There were nearly 10 million foreclosures. And imagine all those families who had, hard fought for their equity. It was many Black and Latino families who were targeted through subprime loans. But what happened was that, that homeownership was part of the New Deal that was won through labor struggles and militant community struggles in earlier decades, and homeownership to a section of the middle class that was created But that home ownership was lost in a massive way in the Great Recession, and that has not come back. So since the Great Recession, in the 12 years we've had since then, we have seen more and more working people, especially the millennial generation, becoming renters, not homeowners. And as Kali correctly said, that's not coming back. So we better get organized and fight for a different kind of society, actually putting people over profit.
Okay, now I want to shift to how you've been organizing the rent strikes, because it's clear that there needs to be a certain critical mass, people in a building to take part. Otherwise, the individuals that do it could get penalized. But if a certain critical mass does it, then it's going to be more difficult to do something like that. So, and then also that remains the question of how do you organize during a coronavirus where people are supposed to be social distancing, which actually should be called physical distancing, because people are very social on social media. But, you know, Sasha, I forget her last name, did an excellent description of that on your show. It was like a point by point. I almost want to edit that out of your town hall the other day and make a separate video of it, because it really gave the mechanics of how to do this. Which one of you would like to talk about how you have been organizing the rents? Shall we go to you, Peggy, because we haven't heard from you in a couple minutes?
Okay, yes, I'll go. New York Communities for Change and Housing Justice for All, we have been doing a virtual campaign. We have been interacting with members on Zoom, posting on social media, collecting stories about anyone that's been suffering throughout this crisis, to make it known what is going on, to bring awareness, to talk about the strike, to talk about that we've had enough, that we are tired. So we have been utilizing social media as a tool to be able to tell our stories. And that's what we have been doing.
And how about you, Kshama? Do you want to talk about some of the points that Sasha made? Because I thought they were so excellent.
It's absolutely correct what you're saying, which is that, you know, we cannot be in any way irresponsible or reckless about this. And in fact, the primary reason we organized this town hall through my council office on Thursday night was because, as you were saying, people are already talking about it, but it's important to understand what it is that we're talking about. And yes, it's true. If you are a tenant in a building, and if you're watching this, and if you're unable to pay your rent, first of all, to clarify, just because you are unable to pay rent, that doesn't make it a rent strike. And even 1,000 of us not being able to pay rent doesn't make it a rent strike. It is when we explicitly get organized as tenants, as a collective, organized as a collective strength, and then make concrete demands to the landlord. And when those demands are not met, we withhold the rent or part of the rent. That is what makes it a rent strike. Just like workers in a workplace have to really organize, have to have strategy and tactics in order to win against the power of the bosses. It's the same thing. In fact, even more. I mean, the political clout of corporate landlords and the property management corporations and the big banks, if you're a homeowner who can't pay your mortgage payment every month, then that cannot be underestimated. I mean, these are some of the most rapacious sections of the capitalist class. They have batteries of ruthless attorneys. They have enormous cash reserve. They have the political parties in their pockets, including, as I said, the Democratic establishment. And so when you're going up against that kind of adversary, you have to have a sober assessment of your own forces. So there's no question about that. At the same time, though, I would say, as you all have said, millions, tens of millions of people now going forward in the next few months are going to be able to pay their rent. So if we don't get organized, if we just tell ourselves, well, our rent strike is too radical, it's too, I don't want to organize my tenants, maybe I won't get majority support, it's too scary. Yes, it is scary. Absolutely. It is legitimate to feel afraid about it. But my point is that if we don't get organized, then evictions are happening, foreclosures are happening. And in fact, we will see, unless we get organized and fight as renters and homeowners and organize nationwide, we will see a massive, massive wave of evictions and foreclosures, just like we saw nearly 10 million foreclosures in the Great Recessions. And that's why we have no choice but to get organized. So what I would suggest is that rather than seeing it as an all or nothing, oh my God, rent strike, instead we should be more sort of sober, and also, as you said, more tactically detailed about it. Like, what are we actually talking about? So I would, and this is what our message was at the town hall on Thursday night, is that May 1st is a crucial date for workplace actions. Whether it's a strike action or not is not the main point. The point is, can we organize our workplaces around actions that will, send a notice to the bosses that we are fighting back? Can we organize renter actions? And whatever action you are able to get your fellow tenants around, majority of them, organize that. It is not, as I said, it's not an all or nothing. It means, it could even be as simple as all tenants in your building are still able to pay your rent, but you're organizing in solidarity with the overall renters' rights movement in the nation today by demanding that your landlord fix all the problems in your building, which is a perennial problem for renters. So whatever demand you want to take on, which you feel is possible to organize around, do it, but do it in solidarity with this nationwide movement. And I also think that May 1st has to be a day of actions for us to come out with social distancing. So in Seattle, for example, we are planning to have a car caravan protest that links both the renters issues and the need for rent suspension, along with the tax Amazon issue. And so that, people are actually getting their voices heard through a protest action, but that is a creative action where we are not endangering each other during the virus pandemic, but really doing it in a safe way.
Well, I really wanted to get into the mechanics, the step-by-step of how to organize this, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take Sasha's presentation because it was really excellent.
I'll just say on that, we have an FAQ, and those are the steps that Sasha went over. We're happy to share the FAQ with you, and you can share it widely. In fact, a number of tenants from around the country are now watching, looking at that document, and it outlines specific points like, first of all, how will you get to know your tenants in social distancing? You can't go and talk to them because, you have to be safe. So slip a note under their door telling them who you are, how they can contact you, and why you think they should get organized with you. Organize a Zoom meeting, organize a phone call, organizing a text loop, agree on some concrete demands, and send a joint letter to your landlord. Those are the kind of concrete steps you can take.
Great. Now let's go to you, Kali, because you're talking about a general strike. And I'm assuming, since you're calling it for May 1st, you're just referring to essential workers, because those are the only ones that are going to be working. What exactly are you asking people to do, and how many either cities have you organized this in, or are you organizing by type of worker, like grocery store workers or Instacart drivers? Tell me about the mechanics of this, not so much the necessity for it, the reasons behind it, but how you're organizing it.
Well, one thing to clarify for us, this is just Cooperation Jackson's view. We're calling this like a broad class strike. So it's not just the workers, who are deemed essential and who are out there. We're encouraging everybody on the front lines to join in this however they can. If it's just, wearing a red shirt is one of the things that we're putting out, or wearing a button, or taking some action during lunch. As Kshama laid out, however you can engage, we're asking folks to engage. But we're not posing this as just workers as opposed to folks who are renting. For us, what we've tried to include, no work, no shopping, no rent, no mortgage, because truth be told, a lot of folks that we're hearing from who are working from home are working more hours now than they were before, and doing so even under more draconian type regulations. So there's some different companies we've heard about where folks can monitor how much time you're actually spending on the computer. If you're surfing the web on something else, not paying attention to what your boss is selling, or I mean that literally. So workers wherever, if you're at home, strike at home, strike in place. That's one of the things that we're demanding. And the critical thing I think for us that we're saying is that, similar to what was laid out around the rent strike, how we communicate that we are acting in solidarity with each other is the most critical thing, I think, at this point in time. Because people are, there's millions of people now who are either unemployed or who are being forced to work from home. And I'm saying that in a sense of we want to maintain physical distancing by all costs, but this level of productivity that they're extracting from us is something we have to be mindful of in the future, because capital is learning some new lessons from this. We all better take heed from that about how to reorganize the workforce and to make more and more of us even more flexible on the heels of this once this is all over. So we better learn some new lessons quick and get organized to deal with again, some of these negative ramifications that they're going to try to force down our throat if we're not organized. So getting organized, being in solidarity is the key point. So we are asking folks to start, if you're striking in place, to start with the basic. We all have some access to social media. On May 1st, for those who are doing that, take a picture, put it on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever other social medium you have. State why you are striking, state what your demand that you're in unison with, and project that so that we can send a clear message to all those who are monitoring those communications, and best believe that they are monitored, that we are acting in unison with each other, and that there are millions of people who are taking this, not just ones and twos, and that we are going to stand in solidarity with each other on the heels of this. Now, you asked a question about, is May 1st enough time? We were very clear from the beginning that this is a call towards a general strike. We don't see May 1st as being an ending place, but rather a launching place.
Okay.
And that the broad coalition that we're building, which includes our call, Corona Strike, May 2020, we're now collaborating with each other. And we are going to start calling for and invite everybody who's in earshot of this and all inclusive, that we know that come the first of every month, there are going to be some real consequences that workers are going to have, be it rent, be it some other utility bill, be it some credit card debt or some other, we know this is going to take place for months, if not years to come. And that we want to make the first of every month a critical point of united action where we all take place, we all act in unison with each other to send clear demands to the government, to the forces of capital, that it's a new day based upon our organized strength, and that this is what we're going to fight for, stand in unity for, and ultimately build together.
Well, I'm totally for that. And I would be very interested in helping fund an infrastructure to make this national. I think we should be having national calls. I remember during Occupy, there was a group called Interoccupy, which was out of Occupy Wall Street, and they used the Maestro call system to organize. And you could have thousands of people on. You could press 1 if you agreed with something, 2 if you didn't agree, so you could get consensus. You could go into breakout rooms based on your region or your working group. For instance, if we wanted to have one for Amazon workers or Instacart workers or Uber drivers, or if we wanted to have one for the Northeast. I mean, there's millions of ways we can do that, but I feel like it is going to be better if we can all be on the same page and, pick what is that action that month that everybody does, so that there's more power to it. So we can talk more about that offline, but let me just make one final point before we end the show. And this is something that Priscilla Grimm from Occupy Wall Street said to me that I hadn't thought of. She said that now people can get $600 a week on unemployment. That is more than some of these grocery workers are making.
That's right.
So they should be quitting their jobs rather than risking their lives right now with the conditions that they're being forced to work under. And also she was mentioning how she just went on Medicaid, and she said that's how people are going to be getting health care. So what do you think about the fact that there's going to be months of people getting unemployment, months of people getting health care? I think the capitalist class, even though this bailout was not remotely sufficient for the working people, they've given people are going to get used to something that they're not going to want to give back. So do you think there's some unintended consequences of what they did and how we can use that to our advantage?
It's about control. That's all it is about. It's about controlling us, because when they're placing that stimulus check, like saying this is how much we are going to receive, that amount is not sufficient. It's us. It's about our people. It's about our lives. And we have to take that back, because when we have, since this coronavirus has occurred, for example, we've had many in the nursing homes. Many families have been dying by themselves. They've been suffering through this by themselves. We have not been able to say goodbye. So at the end, we have to take our control back. So if we're not unifying, if we're not organizing, if we're not coming as one, things are not going to happen the way they need to happen. And we have seen how Cuomo has been arguing with de Blasio, and then now he's arguing with Trump. So they're all fighting with each other instead of saying, listen, we are in a crisis. This is about the whole country. No, it's for them. It's about power. And it's all it's about, because they're not the ones who's suffering out here. And they're not the ones who's had to make the necessary changes. They're more concerned about funds, but they're not concerned about the health care of the people. And we are in a healthcare crisis. And instead of putting everything and saying, okay, I'm going to automatically cancel rent, I'm going to cancel the mortgage payments to make sure that everybody have the necessary things that they need, then things would have been happening accordingly. But because we as a people, this is why we've done this mutual aid, because we've had to come together and help out each other, because we got. They're not concerned about us. We're concerned about us. We're concerned about our children, our grandparents, our great grandparents. So if we're not doing this, and this is something that we need to do, because what upsets me is that my Black and Brown communities have been suffering. Now, all of a sudden, there's a testing site that's been in place now, but because of the recent budget cut that Cuomo did, the treatments are not going to be in place. What about my people? What about the Black and Brown minorities? What about the illegal immigrants that are not able to get the funds that they need? And this is another concern, because everyone is talking about, what about the illegal immigrants that's not able to receive the stimulus checks, receive the funds, so they could be able to keep things afloat?
Okay, well, you think that it's not sufficient. The point that I was making was people are going to be getting things that is going to give them a taste of what they could have all the time, which could add to our power. Do either of you, Kali or Kshama, see the point that I'm trying to make about that?
Look, things are not going back the way that they were, nor should they. That's the part I think we need to drive home. And ultimately, speaking in this case as an individual, I think we need to be encouraging folks to redefine from the bottom up as a class how the society functions and operates, and that we should be encouraging folks wherever they are to democratize their workplaces, transfer the ownership through the occupation, to make sure that all of the workplaces meet human needs and protect workers first and foremost. Because best believe if in the places that, like, I'll just cite us as a small example, because we own our own labor to a great degree, and we own our own equipment, we can shut down in the best interest of our own health and safety. Every worker should be able to do that, period, right? Throughout this country, and I would argue throughout the world. But it's going to take a tremendous amount of organizing to get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think, the point that the comrade made, I think you said her name was Priscilla, about folks, quitting and going ahead and take the relief. That makes one point, but then it misses another point. I think in the immediate sense, I could go for something like that, because you actually make better wages than you would, and you actually have a better form of immediate kind of relief. But once things are over,
Mhm.
you don't want to send people back to, you know, an 8-hour work job, right? And we don't want to send folks back into conditions where their boss get to dictate what the terms are, what the wages are, what, you know, what the working conditions are. Workers need to make those dictations. So we have to encourage folks, I would argue, not only just be struggling for better working conditions, we need to be struggling to take over the system itself, right? Starting with our forms of employment or our places of employment, and turn them into places that are democratically run by the workers themselves. This
Yeah.
is something I think is within our capability of doing. And I think the level of consciousness about people learning about the system and its total disregard for human life is helping that. But I think we are going to have to keep pushing for more, and to get people to understand why we can't go back or even try to go back to what was before.
Well, Bernie had a really good plan for workplace democracy. You could go look it up on his website, and worker-owned co-ops, something that he's been pushing. I actually covered the Uber and Lyft, ride sharers strike last fall in Los Angeles, and was asking, why are you begging for crumbs from these employers? Why don't you just start your own app? And it was told to me that, yes, doing an app is not so expensive, but what the venture capitalists do is they can put millions and millions in while, that app is becoming like a monopoly, so that, everybody joins it, whether you're a driver or whether you're a rider, and then they've got you. So for somebody to try to peel off and do their own app, how are they going to get the users? And it was explained to me that it's just so difficult. Similarly, we see all these newspapers shutting down. You kind of wonder, why don't all the reporters and the people who physically produce the paper get together and buy it? There was that great example of, I think it was called Republic Windows, that
Right.
one company where rather than like liquidate the business, he offered it to his employees. I mean, that's the kind of thing.
But can I just say that it wasn't offered to the employees. The reason they won the kind of thing that Kali is talking about, which is democratic ownership, was through strike actions. They sit in actions. And so there is a fundamental difference between what you're talking about, which is worker co-ops versus or starting your own app and whatever, and democratic ownership of the commanding heights of the economy, which is the biggest corporations. We do have to take, the only way we can move towards a different kind of society, a better society, is for workers to take democratic ownership of the corporations that belong in the hands of the capitalist class. As Peggy said, who controls the wealth has the power to decide what to do with that wealth. So it's not possible for us to set up our own worker co-ops while all the wealth and the power and the clout still rests in the hands of the same class at the top, and then somehow create a different kind of society, because they will overpower what we are doing. So it's good intentions is not going to do it. We have to concretely take the wealth into our own hands, democratically speaking. But that is not going to happen because it's a good idea. It will require massive political struggles. It will require revolutionary struggles. And I really agree with Brother Kelly and Peggy that, this moment is clarifying for a lot of people, because they're seeing that even in this pandemic, even when people are dying and we are facing such grave dangers, even at this moment, the billionaires are preoccupied with their own profit margins, and they're willing to literally let us die. I mean, Trump has said everybody should go back to work on May 1st. So even if we said, let's vast majorities of grocery workers and warehouse workers stay home and take unemployment because you're getting $600. Well, the capitalist class is not going to accept that. Even if they don't do it, they're telling us to go back to work. So imagine what kind of backlash we will have from the capitalists if we say, the workers who are working right now, go take unemployment. They're not going to just let us do that till the end of time, even if $600 was what we were aiming for, which is not going to be enough for us to survive on. $600 a week is not enough, but it is something, yes. But so my point is that there is no way of avoiding political struggle and workplace struggles and militant labor organizing. And it is a strategic moment because people are recognizing that capitalism doesn't work, and even in this pandemic they're looking out for themselves, And furthermore, there's another thing that you and your guests brought out, which is that strategically essential workers, frontline workers are positioned well to carry out actions, because in this pandemic, it is clear they are the ones running the economy. The billionaires who are hiding at home and taking care of themselves, they are not the ones that the economy is running on. It's the delivery workers, warehouse workers, farm workers, healthcare workers, postal workers, the custodial and cafeteria workers at hospitals. They are the ones who are helping society run right now. So we do have a strategic moment to organize various kinds of workplace actions, including strike actions. And we shouldn't get too hung up on whether it's a general strike or not. We should use May 1st, as Kali said, as a starting point of a major social struggle, a period of social struggle.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is the final question I want you to opine about, and that is the role of unions. Because we have seen the number of people in unions diminish rapidly. The last Great Depression, we had many more people in unions, and they were able to get more of their demands met. Over the years, we've seen unions being decimated, and those that exist seem to be led, and not in all cases, but in many cases, by union leaders that have become part of the managerial class. And they more often want access to the Democratic Party and their apparatchiks than they care more about the working class. So yes, they fight for benefits, wages and benefits for their specific union members, but then there's not a lot of solidarity with the working class. And the example I always give is the Maria Elena Durazo, who headed the LA County Federation of Labor. It's kind of like the local version of the AFL-CIO, bussed in 500 workers to Carson, California in 2013 to speak against their fracking moratorium, because they were led by the Teamsters and the IBEW, who get jobs in the fossil fuel industry. So there they were, not caring about the working class, low-income people of color in that community. And then, you know, we saw Sarah Nelson, who's a great union leader, the flight attendants union leader. She was working very hard for the airline workers to get their bailout. You know, she was very focused on people that work for the airlines to get their pay during this period, because 90% of the planes have been grounded. But it was just announced yesterday by the airlines in the financial press that as soon as they're done, you know, paying back their loan that they got from the government, they're going to start making massive furloughs. So, you know, and then finally the Postal Workers Union. This is killing me, because also back in 2013, I reported on how they are trying to be privatized. The Postal Accountability Act of 2006 required that they pre-fund healthcare workers for their retirees 75 years into the future. No other government agency had this requirement. And it took this agency that was in the black, put them into the red, to the point where they were selling off post offices. And now Trump made sure that they didn't get any funding in the CARES Act. And they're saying that they have about 3 more months till July, in which they will be totally bankrupt. And we know that the post office gets 600,000 people, a lot of African Americans, into middle class jobs. And this union leader, this Mark Diamondson, was, when asked about if he was going to do, what are you doing about this? Oh, well, we're reaching out to our congressman. When asked about anything more militant, like a strike, he said, well, we haven't thought about that yet. And that is crazy to me. These postal workers, if they all went on strike right now, they could shut down the entire system. And they could also be putting letters into people's mailboxes, telling them what's happening to their postal service, because people love the postal service. And they don't want to do that, you know, because it's illegal. You know, I think we have to do something illegal. We have to be subversive. We have to do nonviolent civil disobedience, like Mario Savio said.
We have to remember that in the 1930s, in many sectors, unions were still illegal, right? And so they were fighting to be able to protect workers in conditions where the state and the corporations could be very vicious and brutal, killed a lot of organizers. And I'm bringing that back up because I think it speaks to your last point. This is a period where the constraints that we hold in our own mind around bourgeois legality are basically going to have to be cast aside and put out the door. Now, I'm not talking about a bunch of adventurous stuff that people just do on their own. We have to get people organizing collectives to make sure that we create new norms, new dynamics. We're able to protect each other, and we're able to keep the reactionary force of the oppressive forces at bay. That's going to require a great deal of organizing. We need to get serious and real about that. But we're not going to change the system. We're not going to create a new reality, a better world, by remaining within the limited framework of kind of bourgeois rights that already exist. We need to get that out of our heads to the greatest extent possible. That's not going to happen overnight, because people have to build up their courage. They have to build up, believing that the solidarity, that the folks that they know and that they work with and they love and they care are going to have their back. So that's going to take some time to build up, but it's ultimately where we're going to have to go. Unions can either help support that, or they can be moved out of the way of history. I hope they wind up supporting. Some of them will, some of them won't. Some of them have to be moved and organized. I can tell you with some of our efforts, we've reached out to almost every union we have connections with, and we've met a mix of encouragement and conservatism, right, in the call. The labor left, basically, as it exists, I think has been pushing and struggling, somewhat quietly to try to get things to move. I think they're starting to meet some success, the different forces there. But I think unions have to be very mindful that they may not exist come 2 or 3 years, post this crisis, given the way things are being reorganized, if they think the normal rules and regulations are going to protect them. They're not. And we have to remember that capital conceded to these because of the strength of organized workers, coming together. It's not like they just willingly ever accepted unions or any other form of working class organization. We've only gotten what we've gotten because we were able to maximize our strength at various points in time. They've always wanted to eliminate these things. This is the opportunity for them to do so, if we let them get away with it. But that's a point for us on a broad class-based, basis and orientation to fight for. It's not going to be easy, but it's something we have to do. And I think we have to really ask the question, what do we want the new society to look like? Let's be clear about that. Kshama brought up the question of socialism on an individual basis of her being a socialist. I'm going to put out here that is what I think we ultimately need to be fighting for, and let's get to it.
Right. Well, we've come to the end of our hour, so I'd like to give each of you a chance to maybe give a 1-minute wrap up and list your social media, where people can follow you, or if there's a website for your strike or your campaign. And you can also feel free to post it in the comments of this show. Start with you, Peggy.
Okay. Well, I'm on Facebook, Peggy Perkins. I also have a page. I mean, once you click to my page, then I can send you. Also have my Instagram, Melanin Goddess. I will actually post
your organization.
My organization. I'm with New York Communities for Change. I'm also with Housing Justice for All. And I'm also the co-chair of the Working Family Party's Nassau County Club.
And you can post in the comments where they can be followed.
Yes, I will.
And
Thank
also,
you.
Is there a link also for your campaign for the bill in New York State that you want people to?
Yes, it's bit.ny/May1. I could actually post it. I'll post it again in the comments for everyone to follow.
Okay, thanks. Kshama?
You can follow me on my Seattle City Council website. You can just Google my name and it'll show up. But also, people should feel free to go to my political organization, Socialist Alternative, which is socialistalternative.org. And also, concretely, we're fighting for the Tax Amazon campaign. So taxamazon.net is a very important thing that people should check out, because we are right now in the middle of this pandemic fighting to tax big businesses so that we can fund cash assistance for the most marginalized working families here. And in fact, I'm happy to say that, Peggy mentioned that she's part of the Working Families Party. The Working Families Party here in Seattle is part of our Tax Amazon effort. And just if I might say in closing that, I really agree with a lot of the points that Brother Kelly just made, which is that, we absolutely need to use this opportunity to build militant worker struggles, labor struggles, community struggles. And a lot of that, if you go follow the law under capitalism, is going to be illegal. But the union movement itself was illegal to begin with. Marriage equality didn't exist until people walked on the streets and carried out nonviolent civil disobedience. Sit-in strikes are illegal. Many of our states are right to work, so-called right to work states where striking is illegal. And you know what? And the union leaders, many of them are not leading the struggles. If you look at the Black sanitation workers in Pittsburgh, they are Teamsters, but they carried out it was a rank and file strike action. It was illegal wildcat strike, but they did it because they're afraid for their lives and they want to fight for their rights. So that's the kind of solidarity that is building within union and non-unionized workers. So really, I would say just in closing that rank and file unionized workers have a big role to play, but they should circulate petitions for May 1st actions and challenge the union bureaucracy to participate in it, or as Kali said, push them aside, because we need unions. We don't need an establishment-tied leadership. We need a leadership that is accountable to the working people so that we can really build revolutionary movements out of this pandemic.
Before Kali makes his last point, I want to echo that the Culinary Workers Union in Nevada ignored the recommendation of their leaders when they voted en masse for Bernie Sanders. They had put out a smear piece about him being the only one who didn't support their culinary union health plan. And guess what? Now that they've all been laid off, they're not getting that health care. So yeah, this is what needs to happen. So final point and way people can follow you and your campaign, Kali Akuno.
Only final point is, spoken so much, let's get organized. May 1st, again, is a launching pad, not a landing place. We got a long way to go in terms of organizing our folks in the millions, the hundreds of millions. Let's utilize this time for what it's worth, for what the system has exposed itself to be, I think, to everybody in plain sight. And join us basically to get in contact with us, my organization. You can find us at Cooperation Jackson on Facebook. You can find us at cooperationjackson.org for our website. And in terms of connecting in with the strike, look for Corona Strike on Facebook, Twitter. Look for General Strike 2020, and we hope everybody joins us May 1st.
I want to let people know that my show tomorrow is going to be with Branko Marcetic, who's a staff writer for Jacobin, and he just published a book on Jacobin Press called Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden, which is unfortunate because he's going to be the nominee unless they try to switch him out with Cuomo at the virtual convention. And then after that, I'm going to be covering the car rally at Mayor Eric Garcetti's house that the LA Tenants Union is doing to try to get him to put in a rent freeze. I also am going to try to get on his press call on Monday. He does them daily at 5:15. In which I'm going to ask, he talks about, he wants 15,000 hotel rooms for homeless people. So far, he's only gotten about 1,500. And somebody asked him why it's proceeding so slowly. And he says, well, remember, we have to pay for these rooms. And my point is going to be, no, he's always touting his public-private partnerships and his mayor's fund, which everybody knows is just a slush fund for developers. Let him get all these hotel owners, the luxury hotels, the Four Seasons, the Waldorf Astoria. They have nobody staying there now because nobody's traveling during this pandemic. I'd like to see him use his clout to open up those rooms to the homeless. Wouldn't that be awesome? Thanks again for being on the show. Stay safe, stay home, and keep fighting.